Imagine standing in the heart of Madrid, sun on your skin, Spanish words dancing in the air, 1,000 years of culture pressed into the pavement beneath your feet. You feel home, rooted, Iberian, European. But what if I told you, your father's line isn't from here? Not even close. 4,000 years ago, nearly every single male lineage that once lived on this land vanished, replaced. Not in battle, not by fire or famine, but by men no one talks about. Strangers who arrived silently, then fathered the future. They didn't just conquer. They reprogrammed the ancestry of a continent. We call them Western Europeans today, but the genetic record tells another story. One etched in bone, not books. Beneath the skin of modern Spain lies a buried migration so complete, so precise, that it erased nearly 100% of the original Y chromosomes. Not a trace of paternal Iberia before 2000 BCE survives in most men today. It's a clean break, a reboot, and almost no one knows it happened. You could walk past a statue of a Roman emperor or a cathedral built by Visigoths and still miss the real invaders because they left no cities, no scrolls, no names, just DNA. And yet, this wasn't a bloody conquest. Archaeology shows no mass graves, no scorched villages. So how do you explain a genetic coup with no visible war? What kind of power makes women choose new fathers for their children without a sword being drawn? These weren't just migrations. They were seductions of identity, replacements of memory. And if your name is Garcia, Lopez, or even Sanchez, you might be walking proof of their legacy. But the most shocking part? This wasn't just about who won. It was about who stayed and who got remembered. If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe for more untold stories. Because the greatest ancestral takeover in Iberian history didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in the bedroom, and one small grave is about to reveal how it all began. They didn't come with legions, no iron siege, no fire on the hills, and yet, within just 500 years, every father in Iberia was gone, not dead, erased. Somehow, by the end of the Bronze Age, nearly all male lineages from the ancient Iberian world had vanished, replaced by men from somewhere far beyond the mountains. From the Pontic Steppe, horsemen, traders, warriors maybe. But what's eerie is how quiet the takeover was. No mass graves, no smoldering cities, just a slow, deliberate unraveling of bloodlines, one generation at a time. We still don't know their names, but we know their chromosome, R1b. It swept through Iberia like a shadow tide, and it didn't need a war to win, because this wasn't conquest. This was replacement from within. In a lonely burial site called Castillo de Benit, archaeologists found a man and a woman laid side by side. She was native. Her DNA echoed back to the first farmers of Iberia. He was something else, foreign, genetically tied to a wave of steppe ancestry surging west from Ukraine and Russia. Same grave, same customs, but their lineages never touched before that moment. This was no accident. Generation after generation, steppe-descended males had children with local women, until the local men disappeared from the record entirely. Nearly 100% of Y chromosomes were turned over. Gone. How? Not with fire, not with chains, but with status, with alliance, with something deeper. Imagine a world where daughters of the land are married off to newcomers, men who speak differently, carry strange rituals, offer bronze, horses, power, and slowly the native men fade into the background, forgotten by history, deleted by genetics. It wasn't war that erased them. It was inheritance. It was patriarchy. And yet, across Iberia, not everyone yielded. One people refused to forget who they were. Same genes, different future. Because while the stepfathers wrote themselves into the DNA of a continent, one culture, high in the northern hills, refused to change their voice. They carry the same blood as their neighbors, but they don't speak the same language. Never have. High in the mist-wrapped valleys of northern Iberia, one tribe held the line. Through empires, through crusades, through collapse and conquest, they stayed. The Basques. And here's the twist. Their Y chromosome, R1b, is the same as the men who erased almost every other paternal line across the peninsula. The same male migration, the same Bronze Age wave. But the Basques didn't become like everyone else. They didn't speak Latin. They didn't fold into Rome or fall to the Crescent. They didn't convert, dissolve, or forget. Their language, Euskera, has no known sibling, no Indo-European roots. It predates Latin, predates Celtic, predates even memory. And their DNA? Unmoved. While the rest of Iberia tells a story of fusion, of mosaic ancestry and endless rewrites, the Basque genome sits like a frozen lake, unchanged since the Iron Age, unaffected by Rome, unaffected by Islam, unaffected by everything that rewired the rest of Europe. The world shifted around them, and they stayed still. How? Maybe it was geography, fortress-like mountains that kept strangers out. Maybe it was belief. Maybe it was fear. Or something deeper, an instinct to guard not just land, but story. Because when the fathers changed, the languages changed. But here the voice remained. So what is identity? Is it your DNA? Or the story you keep telling, even when no one else understands the words? And if the Basques are the genetic ghosts of ancient Iberia, if they preserve the soul of a forgotten people, then what about everyone else? What happened to the ones who didn't resist? The ones whose story began not in resistance, but in survival? Because before the farmers, before the horsemen, before even the concept of Europe, there were two lineages, trapped by ice, fighting to endure. The ice was coming. From the north, the glaciers crept, slow, crushing, relentless. Europe turned white, silent, unlivable. But not here, not in Iberia. Tucked between the mountains and the sea, this corner of the continent stayed warm enough just to breathe. And in that breath, two human stories collided. One, older than memory, descendants of the Magdalenian culture, cave painters and mammoth hunters who once roamed Belgium and France. The other, a newer pulse from the east, tied to the Villabruno lineage that would come to shape all of post-Ice Age Europe. These two groups were never meant to meet. But here, in this frozen pause of the world, they did. They didn't fight. They didn't flee. They fused. While the rest of the continent emptied, frozen, abandoned, Iberia became a human time capsule, a fusion zone, a refuge not just from climate, but from extinction. Imagine it, two bands of survivors, speaking no shared language, shaped by different gods, different myths, different fire rituals, living side by side, breathing the same coastal air. They passed down stories in ochre and stone. They passed down children with the blood of both worlds. And their legacy still lives in the bones of modern Iberians. A unique cocktail of Paleolithic DNA, unseen anywhere else in Europe. Because while the glaciers erased the rest here, in this pocket of warmth, history hid. But no refuge lasts forever. The cold receded. The land opened. And with it came something new. Not predators. Not soldiers. Farmers. And they didn't just bring wheat or pottery or villages. They brought the first true erasure. Because when the Neolithic dawn broke over Iberia, it wasn't the cold that changed everything. It was the seeds. They didn't come with weapons. They came with seeds. Around 5700 BCE, strange sails appeared on the Mediterranean horizon, carrying no warriors, no kings, just families, tools, livestock, and an idea that would upend the human story. Farming. They crossed the sea from Anatolia and stepped onto Iberian soil, like ghosts from the future. To the hunter-gatherers who lived here, wild, free, and ancient, these newcomers must have seemed alien. Their bones buried with bowls. Their homes made of mud and permanence. Their gods quiet, but watching. And yet, within a few generations, everything changed. The forests grew quiet. The fires moved indoors. And the bloodlines began to split. Because these farmers didn't just plant crops. They planted themselves. Their DNA spread like wheat, fast, deep, irreversible. A sharp genetic break. New Y chromosomes. New customs. New rules. In Central Europe, these waves erased almost all traces of the old world. But Iberia resisted. Here, something strange happened. Instead of vanishing, the hunter-gatherers blended in. Their ancestry lingered longer than anywhere else in Europe. Their daughters married farmers. Their sons survived in fragments. In the quiet valleys of the Northwest, old blood still flowed, even as plows cut through sacred ground. It wasn't a war. It was a negotiation, one that rewrote identity, not with fire, but with marriage. So when we speak of ancestry, we don't just speak of who won. We speak of who was woven in. Because these ancient farmers didn't just feed people. They reprogrammed what it meant to belong. And just as the Iberian genome began to settle, just as this fragile fusion found balance, a whisper crossed the sea. Another people, another lineage, uninvited but unforgettable. And this time, they came from the desert, long before the minarets, before the crescent flew over Al-Andalus, before anyone whispered the word more. They were already here, not in armies, not in conquest, but in blood. Buried beneath the dust of central Iberia, archaeologists found him, a Copper Age man, laid to rest near a settlement called Camino de las Yeseras. His tools were local, his grave Iberian, but his DNA? Maghrebi. Fully. No trace of Iberian ancestry, as if he had stepped out of the Sahara, crossed the sea, and vanished into myth. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Not in 2500 BCE. Not over 3,000 years before Islamic rule. So how did he get here? There are no written records, no battle scars, no tales of desert traders or sun-scorched migrations. Only a whisper, faint, salt-stung. Maybe it was trade, a lone voyager seeking copper or salt or stories. Maybe it was exile, or love. A ship drifts through morning fog, a single figure at the bow, watching cliffs rise from the sea like ghosts. Did anyone meet him when he arrived? Did they understand his words? Or just his hunger? He didn't conquer. He didn't build temples. But he stayed. And through him, 2 continents touched, centuries before history noticed. He's not alone either. Other graves. Other fragments. Scattered hints of North African ancestry. Long before the world began dividing itself into East and West, Europe and Africa, Christian and Muslim. These were the forgotten travelers, the bridges before there were roads, the quiet connections that rewired a gene pool without ever leaving a flag behind. But if that was just a whisper, a soft early link, then what came next was thunder. Because when the empires arrived, Rome, Carthage, the Mediterranean machines, they didn't whisper, they shouted, and Iberian DNA would never be the same. They said Rome conquered the world, but what they don't tell you is how the world conquered Rome. And nowhere was that more true than in Iberia. By the 1st century BCE, legions had carved their way into the peninsula. Iron discipline, marble temples, roads that still cut across the land like scars. But beneath the helmets and laws came something quieter. Blood. The DNA of empire didn't flow from a single source. It spilled in every direction. From the shores of Anatolia, from North Africa's deserts, from the Balkan hills. They came. Soldiers, slaves, settlers. Not Romans by birth, but Romans by command. In a necropolis outside Valencia, a woman lies in a stone tomb. Her bones whisper of the Eastern Mediterranean, genetic markers pointing toward Cyprus, maybe even Syria. Nearby, a man carries a North African Y chromosome, EM183. Common in Berbers, rare in Europe until now. They weren't anomalies. They were the pattern. Rome didn't erase identities, it stacked them. It layered ancestry like stone over stone, until Iberia became something new. Not European, not African, not Middle Eastern, Roman. The empire didn't just rule land, it rewrote the human map. Children born under Roman roofs might carry Egyptian blood and Iberian names. A mother from Carthage, a father from the Danube, a home in Hispania. By the 3rd century, DNA across the peninsula had transformed, not through conquest, but contact. Not invasion, but circulation. Religion changed. Roads connected. But deeper still, silently, so did the roots. And when Rome fell, those roots didn't die. They tangled. They clung to the soil. Because the empire may have collapsed. But the people, they stayed. They kept building, kept mixing. And then the new empire appeared. Not from the north, not from the east, but from across the water, carrying a new language, a new god, and a voice wrapped in calligraphy. The next wave wasn't Roman. It came with a prayer. It began with a fleet. Black sails on a silver sea. The year was 711, and what crossed the Strait of Gibraltar that summer wasn't just an army. It was a civilization. Berbers, Arabs, converts. Their banners carried verses. Their swords silence. They didn't just take cities. They took centuries. Al-Andalus, a new name for an old land. Mosques rose beside aqueducts. Arabic echoed in Roman forums. And the DNA, quiet as ever, began to shift. You might expect clean breaks. Invasion, conquest, purge. But the genetic story? It doesn't read like that. In Christian cemeteries, centuries after the Reconquista began, we still find North African ancestry. Men with Iberian names, buried with crosses, carrying Y chromosomes from the Maghreb. Women whose mitochondrial DNA leads not to Castile or Aragon, but to the Atlas Mountains. The empire of Islam didn't erase the Iberians. It absorbed them. It was absorbed by them. Bloodlines blurred. Marriages crossed faiths. Children were born into contradictions. One study found it clearly. A medieval Christian man, buried in holy ground, with unmistakable Berber ancestry. His body told one story. His genes another. Religion drew lines. But DNA ignored them. For 700 years, Iberia was not a battlefield. It was a borderland. A place where empires kissed and clashed. Where minarets rose beside monasteries. And where identity was fluid, even when belief was not. Even after cities fell, after mosques were turned to cathedrals, the genes stayed. They still do. In the South, North African ancestry lingers in nearly 1 in 10 people, even in places that now deny that past. Because you can erase books, you can tear down walls, but you can't burn what's buried in the blood. And yet, there was one final purge, not by sword, not in battle, but by decree. The people once woven into the heart of Spain were suddenly unwelcome. So what happens to a genome when a country tries to forget its own descendants? They called it purification, but it was erasure. Between 1609 and 1614, tens of thousands of people, families who had lived in Spain for generations, were told they no longer belonged. The Moriscos, descendants of Muslims who had converted to Christianity, or tried to. Their names were Castilian, their prayers Catholic by law, but their ancestry was inconvenient, so they were expelled. By boat, by blade, by silence. It wasn't a battle. It was an administrative deletion, one signature at a time. Centuries of intermarriage, of coexistence, of shared towns and bloodlines, ripped out of the soil like weeds. And yet, they didn't fully disappear, because some stayed, some hid, some were too Spanish to notice, and their DNA stayed with them. Today, in Galicia and western Portugal, places the Moors never ruled, there's a puzzle. North African ancestry, sometimes up to 11%. How? Why there? The history books have no answer, but the blood does. The expelled weren't just from Andalusia. They fled north, west, inland. Some never made it to the boats. Others married into villages that forgot their names. Their descendants don't speak Arabic. They don't trace lineage to the Maghreb. They celebrate Christmas. But their cells carry a whisper, a haplogroup that doesn't match the local story, a mitochondrial ghost, a silent contradiction, because identity is loud. But genetics remembers what nations try to forget. In the archives, the Moriscos vanish. In the genome, they remain. The real twist. Some of the highest traces of North African ancestry exist in regions proud of never being conquered. Galicia, a land of stone churches, Catholic saints, and invisible North African ancestors. So what does that say about borders? About purity? About who belongs? Because even now, centuries later, the Iberian genome refuses to obey the map. And when we look closer, we find something even stranger. A region that wasn't erased, but never even touched. Draw a border on a map, and DNA will laugh. Because in Iberia, identity never stayed still. Look closely. Modern Spaniards and Portuguese carry more than just surnames and saints. They carry whispers. From Paleolithic hunters. From Anatolian farmers. From steppe horsemen, North African traders, Roman settlers, Muslim poets. All buried in the blood. And when you map it, it moves. In the north, the Basques. A genetic time capsule sealed in stone and silence. Still holding the echoes of the Iron Age. Untouched by Rome. Untouched by empire. In the west, Galicia, Catholic, Celtic, and unexpectedly, African. DNA patterns that shouldn't be there. In a land that was never taken. And in the south, a kaleidoscope. The bones of Cordoba, Granada, Seville. They hum with the legacy of Al-Andalus. With genes that cross deserts. And seas. And centuries. No language. No religion. No border ever stopped them. You can see it. On the DNA heat maps, glowing like embers. Western European in the spine. North African in the toes. Steppe in the veins. Iberia doesn't look like a nation. It looks like a tidal. Each drop shaped by a different storm. Because identity here wasn't passed down through flags. It was passed down through mothers. Fathers. Silent choices made in candlelight and conquest. You think you know who you are. Where you're from. But in this land, ancestry doesn't match accent. And skin doesn't match story. What if the person you feel like isn't the person your DNA remembers? What if belonging isn't about history, but about inheritance? Because hidden inside these markers, beneath the charts, the clines, the data streams, may lie something far bigger than just the past of Iberia. It might just hold the key to Europe's next great discovery.